Everyone. I'm Dr. Alencia Bowen, the Executive Director of the Franklin University Leadership Center, and I am very delighted today that we're able to host this three-part series on demystifying dark transformational leaders. First, want to share with you that the Leadership Center seeks to create and share knowledge in an innovative manner that promotes leadership practices and advancing teaching and transformative learning experiences. We realize that our society is ever changing and that we're dealing with a dynamic, rapidly changing global community. And because of that, we have focused this year um, um, on how do we actually empower leaders as we go through great transformations. And so today we have Dr. Cecilia Martin, who earned her doctorate in organizational leadership at the University of Maryland Eastern Shore. She is the founder of TEEM, Team Leadership, and Team Leadership Institute, where she specializes in building effective leadership teams, shaping infrastructures to align with the strategy and performance, and working with at-risk youth. Dr. Martin is well known for her work on effective toxic leadership and the dark side of transformational leadership, and this has taken her abroad to places including Brussels, the Czech Republic, and Barcelona. And I will say this year she's going to be going to Switzerland, and we're excited about that opportunity. She and I met during the International Leadership Association, one of those meetings, and immediately we connected because she has very current and relevant information to share regarding leadership. I will also share with you that Dr. Martin is the proud mother of two daughters, Tyler and Kennedy, and they are her greatest joy and her most important job. So let's welcome Dr. Martin as she continues with today's presentation. Dr. Martin.
Thank you, Dr. Bowen. It's good to be here. And hello to everyone. Even though I can't see you all, I definitely feel your presence. Throughout the presentation, I'll be asking you to put some comments in the chat. We will collect these at the end. Along the way, we're going to get some perspective. So feel free to share your comments in the chat. Even if we don't get to them during this presentation, we will definitely circle back on the next two sessions. And I hope you'll join us for sessions 2 and 3. So let's get started. So today we're going to talk about demystifying dark transformational leaders. Now, you know, the title seems a little goofy and I may be dating myself. It says Transformers, more than meets the eye. When I stumbled into the work of dark transformational leadership, I actually was studying and doing my doctoral program and looking at what we were calling transformational leaders versus pseudo-transformational leaders. And we'll get into that in just a bit. Again, the Team Leadership Institute, or Team Leadership, stands for train, equip, empower, and mobilize. With transformational leaders, they are head and shoulders above the rest, and in many respects are seen as the highest form of leadership. They are clearly distinctive from any other leader, and we're going to talk about briefly other types of leaders along the way. These are our change agents. They are able to ignite organizations and accomplish extraordinary outcomes. These folks actually transcend the monotony of day-to-day operations, and they really help us accomplish the mission and vision that we've set forth. Sorry, here we go. In a sort of brief historical view of leadership perspectives, we started with the great man theory, and that just simply says, are leaders born or made? And if you have a moment, I'd like to know from you, do you believe that leaders are born or are they made? And it really is a debatable point, and we'll come back to it again in sessions 2 or 3. Some people say leaders are born, and that was the belief when scholars began the search of sort of establishing the great man theory. So you look at Mahatma Gandhi and Abraham Lincoln and folks of those nature, and you say, well, they're definitely made. They have some type of intrinsic advantage over other folks. So in the pursuit of leadership and understanding what I call as transformers, the scholars began to look at behavior traits, those who could influence others. They looked at, qualities that seemed to stand out from the rest. But again, the question came back, well, if leaders are born and made, then are born and not made, then how is it that an establishment like the military can take what can be perceived as a group of misfits and transform them into a cohesive unit that is dependent on one another to accomplish a mission? So again, are leaders born or made? Then they started looking at contingency theories or situational leadership. And one of the best examples of a situational leader would be 9/11, when the governor or the mayor had to, Rudy Giuliani had to step into a role that the situation called him, he didn't call it. Okay, so these transformational leaders, they usually, they delegate tasks, they participate in the tasks, they tell, they sell, they get you to buy into the moment, and they get the job done. So Rudy Giuliani really has gone down in scholarly history in terms of a situational leader where he did the four elements, tell, sell, participate, and delegate to rebuild New York City. So again, looking at these forms of leaders, then they said, well, what if there isn't a situation called for it? There still are many people out there who have extraordinary skills and influence. And then they began to look at what's called transactional leadership. And these leaders, however, and at one point, it really was the highest form of what they perceived to be as leaders, those who were transactional, which means those that could, pretty much sell a vision. They had some level of charisma, but they were able to find mutual benefits between the subordinate or the follower and the company mission or vision. Then we move into transformational leadership because they said, well, a transactional leader, they can be the best of the proverbial box checkers, right? They can get tasks done, but they don't necessarily inspire others to be their exceptional selves. So that's where transformational leadership came into play. And we're going to look deeply into that. It's really hard to get through, decades in 45 minutes, but that gives you just a little sample. And of course, I know you've heard of servant leadership, where many say that leaders who are exceptional, they are all about giving back, serving to the public. We see companies based on this. I'm sure you can name a few. If you have a minute, I want to pause. And what companies do you think thrive off the servant leadership theory? If you have placed in there Southwest Airlines, Chick-fil-A, and Nordstrom's, actually, you would be correct. Those companies, their foundation is based on the servant leadership model. And I'm sure if you've ever participated in one of those agencies, you could see it for yourself. So as we talk through a little bit, we want to talk about sort of the ontological and epistemological foundation of this work, which means that, ontology and research means that there are multiple realities, and but these realities, their consensus can be drawn based on observation within context. And so you have to understand that leadership theory is context laden. And you can't just say, oh, this leader is exceptional without putting in layers of the context of their leadership. Again, going back to Rudy Giuliani, who I'm not picking on, but today people may, forget the wonderful work that he did based on, some recent activity. However, he was indeed the epitome of a situational leader during 9/11, and we're going to look at examples of transformational leadership leaders as well. Excuse me. When we talk about transformers, I thought, should know what a transformer does literally. I may be presenting this work to PhD engineers and scientists, and I thought, so what does a transformer do, right? Transformers in real life literally are electromagnets, okay? They take power and they can change the voltage up or down. But they really have to function within the capacity of the unit, or, they really augment the work, okay? They also work on altering currents, right? So when you think about that literally and figuratively, think about what a transformer does in leadership. They really impact their sphere of influence. So when we talk about transformational leaders, it doesn't mean that you have to lead millions or thousands or what have you, but you need to be able to identify these traits of folks who are in your organization, because they are the game changers. They are the change agent. They can actually pulse the volume up or down. They are electromagnets that people are drawn to. And so you need to learn how to maximize on that. However, there are some warning signs from those or of those that have the tendency to sway to the dark side. So what are the 4 characteristics of a transformational leader? The first one is idealized influence, and we will unpack each one of these. Inspirational motivation, intellectual stimulation, and individual consideration, okay? The first one is idealized influence. These transformers have the it factor, is what we usually refer to as the it factor. And yes, you need to have all 4 in order to be classified as a transformational leader. Typically in research, however, these transformers were known to have high moral and ethical standards. When it came to ethics, they were considered sort of the North Star in their behavior, in their demonstration, in their outcomes. These folks instill pride and they gain respect. They inspire followers to come along, and they really know how to make a connection to those who are, whether they are subordinates, peers, colleagues, or leaders above them. They know how to lead out and to lead up. The next attribute is inspirational motivation. These folks are confident in the work of others. One key thing you need to know about a transformer, they're really not in the business of cloning themselves, right? Because they want others to invest in their own skills, their own opportunities. They want them to advance and be their highest selves. These are the midwives, the doulas, the coaches, the drill sergeants of the world in organizations. They have a can-do nature. They're motivational in their speaking. Again, they are, electromagnets when it comes to accomplishing the mission and the vision and inspiring others to do the same. The next one is intellectual stimulation, okay? These folks are really, pretty well astute. They're well learned, well versed. They are creative and innovative. They encourage followers to think for themselves. They want you to challenge some of their questions, some of their antics. They want you to speak truth to power, as they say. They love the banter and the wit that comes along with accomplishing a mission, building camaraderie. They usually are well knowledgeable in their craft or skilled, or at least have people around them that are smarter than they are in certain areas. The 4th attribute is individual consideration. And this is the one that I love, because transformers, They are so in tune with their collaborators, their subordinates, their leaderships. In fact, they actually become confidants in many respects to their leaders, because they're trustworthy individuals, and they really know how to help bring balance between work and what's happening at home. They actually care about those things. They have a sort of this personal touch, a keen awareness of everyone's unique talents, skills, and abilities, and they set them up for success. They're not looking for you to use your personal life as an excuse as not to excel and be successful. So they have individual consideration. Going back to transactional leadership, as I said before, transactional leadership was primarily goal oriented. And I like this chart because it really can show sort of a escalation or an ascension or digression, sort of this up and down movement of leadership. But transactional leaders, they are goal oriented, but they are focused on primarily the task alone. They don't want to know about minor problems. They only want to know about the most critical problems and if that critical problem is going to affect the bottom line. They give rewards, both psychological or tangible awards to those who do well, employee of the month, that new car, based on what you've earned, parking space, what have you. But the difference with the transformational leaders that they're going to get those goals and tasks done because they know how to mobilize individuals, but the mission itself is what you're doing in real day-to-day time is purpose-driven. They want you to excel and feel meaningful in the work that you're doing. Not that it's just a task for the bottom line, for the money that's coming into the company, but they want you to understand that no matter how big or small your role is, it is extremely meaningful for that point in time. And then you see in the digression at the very end is the laissez-faire leader who's pretty much hands-off, aloof, and cleaning up on aisle 13 when required. So let's go back a little bit to more reasoning and transformational behaviors, okay? In past literature, when they talked about transformational leaders, it was designed around their intentions and their method and their outcomes, but the outcomes had to be positive, okay? So I began to look at whether or not transformational leaders can also have negative outcomes. Now, don't get me wrong, there has been a lot of study and information and research provided around what has been considered pseudo, inauthentic, bad transformational leaders. None of them wanted to own, though, that they were indeed transformational, but operating from the dark side of charisma. And we'll go more into that. They did, though, segment those two into inauthentic transformational leaders and those who were charismatic, maybe dark, and ineffective. So instead of ignoring or dismissing that some leaders who are indeed destructive are not transformational, I challenge you to think about leaders who are indeed effectively toxic, which is the next level of this whole 3 session series, because at the end of the day, where we landed was that there are some leaders who are effectively toxic. Now, I don't know if I want to do this, but who do you know in modern history that may be an effectively toxic leader? Now I see the chat box lighting up for some. Okay. They are the best of leaders, and the worst of leaders, these transformers. If they're operating from the dark side of charisma, then they can derail your entire company, your mission. They can self-implode your organization. And so it's important to help bring checks and balances and accountability for not just the leader, but the subordinates that they influence. Now, if you yourself is a transformational leader, you're going to really appreciate these 3-point sessions, because you'll be able to identify when you're leaning towards the dark side, if you will, and mitigate some of your own behaviors. So it really is important, because what we're trying to avoid, or what I've been trying to avoid as I take this conversation, around the world, is to not throw the baby out with the bathwater. There are really ways to identify these red flags, mitigate some of this behavior, and we'll talk about that as we go along. Again, there's been work done on inauthentic, toxic pseudo transformation or leaders with transformational traits. I've had the pleasure of meeting Dr. Kellerman as well as Dr. Lippman-Blumen. Kellerman has a range of toxicity, if you will, and there are several identifiers or typologies, anywhere from just being incompetent all the way down to evil. In the middle, you may have callous, insular, and that nature. So there's a range or typologies of where people land in toxicity, okay? With Dr. Lippman-Blumen, which brings up a very good point. Again, there's so much to unpack about this, is that what about those followers? What is it about us that are so attracted at times to these bad actors, these bad transformers? They can't get the work accomplished without the followers. And so there's an allure for some. And with many of them, we've seen that some folks just have a problem self-identifying, trying to figure out who they are. Others are, bad actors themselves, and they are attaching to that value that the toxic leader is exemplifying. So there are many different reasons. We see here, there's negative leadership. There's work on Machiavellianism, where it's better to be hated than loved, and anything goes in politics. His work on principalities is sort of the root of many of those who believe that once you're in power, you can wield it any which way that you will. And the more ruthless you are, the more respected you are. And there are those who exploit their subordinates, and we'll look at this a little bit further. So transformers can be authentic leaders and notably exemplify both constructive and deconstructive behaviors. I would tell you this, when I first started with this, seemingly corny title of Transformers, more than meets the eye. I received a lot of pushback from some of my instructors. It was not a very popular subject, but one of my instructors was from Germany. And when I first did this presentation, we did it in Czech Republic, in Prague, where there were several Holocaust survivors. One of the Holocaust survivors told me this, because in a way I was saying, okay, people like Hitler and Idi Amin and, Stalin, these were, they were bad. They were destructive. They were evil, but they were brilliantly effective in their work. They were transformational. They had all the attributes. They were operating from the dark side of charisma. And I received some positive feedback. What the Holocaust survivor told me that confirmed this notion was that when Hitler first started out, he was not portrayed as this evil individual. In fact, he had a mission to bring everyone out of abject poverty, the country out of abject poverty at the time. He was a war hero. He had been wounded, and but prior to that, he actually was an artist. He was into the arts. Um, he seemed to be a gentle soul. And she said once he started rising to power, that's why it was so easy to implement the concentration camps, because it was patriotism that everyone was supporting, the patriotism that he displayed, the patriotism that he brought to the country. And so when they saw the soldiers marching in the streets, they didn't think anything of it. They thought, wow, isn't this amazing? We're rising to new heights. We're coming together as a people. And so when those same soldiers came and asked them to do their civic duty or to escort them out of their homes, they didn't think they were going to their death. And so, sure, there were other red flags along the way, but by the time that they noticed them, it was much too late. That's why it's important to acknowledge a transformational leader, because they really do have the power to either cause a company to excel or to derail the entire process into something that's negative. We looked at the Enron scandal. I mean, the list can go on and on. So what do these followers need, or these transformers need to be effectively corrupt? First of all, they need colluders, right? They need other top actors, those who are in leadership positions, to be able to sign off secretly, in many cases illegally, on the work that they're doing. Turn the blind eye, because these transformers are gonna help them accomplish their goals financially, whether it's growth, whether it's making their mark. A lot of times companies will use bad transformers just to get more publicity, okay? They need those susceptible followers. And again, that's a whole nother body of work to look at, because when you think of Jim Jones and when you think of other toxic leaders, they had a strong following. And I know that we see some of that today. And then you have a conducive environment. So either the company, the church, the community, the nonprofit is structured in such a way that these transformers are ripe for the work. Okay. Are some transformers effective and corrupt? And I think we maybe can agree that this is correct, okay? Unfortunately, many of these transformers are actively pursued, as I said before. They are embedded within corrupt systems. But there are other times when it's not so black and white, and we're gonna look at this a little bit, because sometimes these transformers are doing something unethical to achieve something ethical. And if you have just a few seconds, can you name me a leader in the chat room that has done something unethical to achieve something ethical? I can tell you one example of that when we move forward, and you'd be surprised maybe for some of you. Here we go. The two faces of transformational leadership, so we can see clearly the ones who are wearing the black hat, right? For the most part. Okay, some of these are really clear, right? And some of you may be wondering, especially on the East Coast, why is Marion Barry on this list? Marion Barry was indeed a transformational leader. I had the pleasure of meeting him and sharing a platform with him for something I was supposed to speak about. And he was so captivating. I had to really bring myself together to focus on what it is I was there to do. This man was magnetic in his personality. Many have said the same is true of Bill Clinton, okay? Marion Barry was transformational. Many of the programs that he set in place for the District of Columbia, much of the work that he did still exists today, okay? But we know, and even with all the mischiefs that he's done, he was, he was shot, I think while he was in city council in his early years. He was, we all know that he was arrested for using crack cocaine on video. And even after that, he was still elected again as mayor. And when they would no longer elect him as mayor, they voted him onto the city council after all of his mischief. Okay. He had negative outcomes though, because the District of Columbia, particularly Ward 8, where he had so much influence, where he came, really started his work in Ward 8 in politics. They are very much still struggling, with the war on drugs. Because of his influence, he, exacerbated that among the youth. So you can be a Marion Barry and still, do drugs and cocaine, right? Bill Clinton, for example, is on here, not for the obvious. Many people want to, peg Bill Clinton as a bad leader. He did a tremendous amount of work, and that's a debatable point in terms of, clearing the US deficit and things of that nature, whether, some of that preceded him or what have you. But he's on the list, not because of his personal shortcomings with Monica Lewinsky and all of that. But Bill Clinton, when he ran for office, he knew that he did not have any international experience, right? That wasn't his major strength. And instead of mobilizing the folks around them, remember, transformational leaders, they really want to not just necessarily clone themselves. They have usually people around them that are smarter than them, and that's how they get the mission accomplished. He had the folks at hand, but he refused to acknowledge what was happening in Rwanda. And on his watch, within 4 or 5 months alone, over 500,000 Rwandans were killed in genocide because he was inept in that area. He was too afraid to act. There are a couple other things that happened on his watch, but that is the most egregious. Okay. And later he apologized for that and what have you. But many have, in addition to his personal flaws, even though it seems like we were excelling in the US under his leadership, there was so much destruction happening around him. And for that reason, many have put him on the black hat list. Clearly on the white hat list, this is pretty clear and evident what these folks have done throughout history. But what isn't so clear are those who may seem to wear the black and the white hat. I would argue that you could also categorize them. We will look at some of these women leaders in the next session. So it'll be interesting because some of these leaders who are strong are dismissed as toxic. Some of them who are strong are looked at as, masculine, nasty women, what have you. They are so grossly misqualified. So that will be a really fun session to look at some of these women and see, one, if they're transformational, and two, if they are operating from the dark side of charisma, or not at all. So these are some of the overlapping constructive traits. So many of the transformational leaders are driven. They have an extreme amount of stamina. And in fact, research shows that most transformational leaders thrive off of 4 hours of sleep. Many of them self-reported. They don't sleep. They're so passionate and tenacious. They can't turn their brain off. So again, if you recognize a transformer, you should put them to work because they're gonna be thinking about the vision while you're sleeping. They are intelligent, as I said before. The Kennedys tell their story about how they had, when they came to dinner, they had to be current on what was happening in the world or happening in the country, and they had to have these intellectual conversations about world issues. They are resilient, they're optimistic, and deeply competitive. So they don't want the company to fail. They don't want the organization or the program to fail, because they are extremely competitive. And most of all, they are strategic. These are tactical, analytical thinkers. Beyond visionaries, they are impeccable at playing chess. They can see the big picture and know which pawn is going to move in which direction. And so they can help you get ahead of the work. Now, here are some of the overlapping destructive traits. Okay, yeah, they are controlling when they are operating from the dark side of charisma, when they are flawed in their character, deeply flawed, not slightly, but deeply flawed in their character, then they are controlling to the point of being obsessive. They are perfectionists. And I know a lot of times many of us use this term as an excuse of being critical and detail oriented, but these folks are not just perfectionists, they're anxious, they're meticulous to the point of being critical and tearing down a person's work or character or emotional well-being. They are dominant, they are bullies, and not only dominant in their behavior, they control the narrative and the rhetoric, okay? They are intimidating and oftentimes extremely defensive. So on the surface, this is what it looks like. And I've highlighted a few terminologies in there: impression management, callous, toxicity, only because we're going to focus on those a little bit later in the following sessions. But impression management is beyond being a chameleon. Oh, I mean, it is controlling the atmosphere. It's almost like they're hypnotic in a way. And that's the only way I could describe Marion Barry and a few others like Bill Cosby. I met him, and we see that how he was transformational in many ways in television, and his sort of portrayal of a rebuilding of the African American family, portrayed in a different light, and and his work in education. It was extreme amount of work in education. But meeting him, I mean, he was an electromagnet. Magnet. He didn't even seem to be distant or aloof. And so these folks can draw you in. I was only with him for maybe 15 minutes, and just that 15 minutes alone, they have this magnetic personality that can draw you in, but it's under impression management. And we'll look at that in session 2. Many bad leaders, what Kellerman describes as bad leaders, these are the 7 typologies I told you about. One of them is callous, but sometimes that's misidentified, particularly in women leaders. And then, of course, the outcomes are usually fraud and corruption, betrayal, and unfortunately, as some of the examples I've given you, death. So here's the aha moment. The way we talk about bad or dark leaders, oftentimes we're throwing the baby out with the bathwater. We are miscategorizing some of these leaders, that when these characteristics are looked at early enough, some of them can be mitigated. There is a range of toxicity in literature. I think, though, we have some room to bring understanding to what that range looks like. Transformational leaders, whether they are authentic in their character, whether that character is good or bad, negative or positive, the outcomes are commensurate. So again, you see the work of a Gandhi versus Adolf Hitler, the outcomes are commensurate, okay? Now, what we're going to talk about next time is this idea of dark transformational leadership versus pleiotropic leadership. And those of you in the nursing, I know there are a lot of you in the medical field on here today. It's a medical term and it's fascinating. And so I think that some of these transformers have pleiotropic leadership traits. Here's a brief overview of what we discussed, and I'm checking the time. We are at 11:15 almost, or my time. Um, and I want to be able to answer a few questions, but here's the general landscape, and each session will go into each of them more and more. But narcissism, Machiavellianism, perfectionism, aggression, okay, overt and covert aggression, impression management, self-promotion, authoritarianism. These are the behaviors of dark leaders, period. Add these components to a transformer and you have a monster on your hands, okay? It's all about characteristics, behavior traits. So what can we do? Here's the dark side. As I said before, this notion of power and strength and being able to command attention and respect. They're willing to invest their own personal capital into the game. These are the folks that are willing to fall on the sword, win or lose. But what can we do to take that and make it something positive? We can take these narcissistic individuals and commission them to draw attention to the value, to the mission and vision of what you're trying to accomplish. They're going to draw people in, okay? We can also take this strength and power and we can inspire them or commission them, to inspire confidence in other peers, preferably with someone who is well balanced, someone who else is in leadership role, and also those who are have high moral standards. Okay, so we don't necessarily have to do away with it, right? These transformers, really can be the agent that you need that can catapult you into the next level. Here's the other bright side of the dark side. Okay, they have such a high level of influence and they are masters at playing chess that you can take them and situate them in roles to where they can then begin to navigate complex, powerful situations. Okay, because they're master at impression management, they really can talk to the least, from the custodian to the CEO, to the politician to the community member on the street. You can't lose if you're able to confine them a little bit in their behavior. Again, constructive traits are clear. Deconstructive traits are also clear. And unfortunately, these transformers, if not accountable, and if they are naturally flawed in their own character, in their own personality, living a corrupt life, then they will migrate to these deconstructive traits. In the context of an organization, though, we can confine that. One of the ways I'll tell you really quickly, one, we talked a little bit about accountability, but the other way is tenure, right? Whether a transformer is good or bad, you may want to tenure their role 2 years, 3 years max. Because anyway, they're good for moving on because they're going to come in and plow your vision. You're going to see benefits from it. And then they may be ready to move on themselves because now the work is done in their mind. They've already given you the blueprint from A to Z, okay? So we're running out of time. I just want to give a few minutes for questions. Next time, again, like I said, we'll talk about examining the dark side of transformational leadership and women leaders, and we'll dive a little bit more into these traits and personalities, some of which may be misconstrued. And I will turn it over to Dr. Bowen.
Yeah, right. What an awesome, awesome introduction and start into critical thinking of transformational leaders and the dark side. It's intriguing to me. And as Cecilia shared, next week on the 25th, we'll be exploring the dark women leaders. So please do not hesitate to register for that and to come in. The first question was, how do we avoid being colluders or followers of such dark leaders slash transformers? And that's from Rachel Chowdhury.
Okay, that's a good question. Well, first of all, you really have to check into your own moral compass, right? Um, Two dark transformers together is a holocaust. Okay, in more ways than one. It's asking for trouble. So first of all, you have to know your own moral compass. And I go back to Marion Barry. You know, when I met him, and like I said, we were there for different purposes, but serving a same common cause. He was there to speak. I was there to speak. He was captivating. And actually invited me to an after session meeting of sorts. I had to say no. You know, you really have to know your line in the sand. You really have to create some healthy boundaries. I didn't know what he wanted. I wasn't gonna find out. So knowing your own moral compass, putting that line in the sand and not crossing, you have to have some healthy boundaries.
Thank you. Jennifer asks, what are some strategies for harnessing a dark leader to achieve beneficial outcomes?
You have to have strong policies in place. That's one. And you have to be willing to um, sort of see those policies through. Too many times, because they're so effective, we give them the slap on the wrist, we turn the blind eye until the work is done, the project is complete.
Hmm.
You have to weigh the good for the bad, because at the end of the day, if you don't harness them through clear policy that you're willing to follow through and hold them accountable to, they need accountability partners, whether they are good or bad.
Hmm.
Transformers have a great transformers have a way to explode. Those people have very close, strong accountability partners to keep them focused, right? You also have to tenure their work. They have to know that they are there for a certain amount of time, even if you extend that time. Because again, a natural transformer could take your whole operation with them, even though they don't mean to. But people are
Hmm.
so drawn and connected to them that they're willing to follow them wherever they go. So tenure that time, have strong policies in place, and be willing to hold them accountable and see them through.
Great. Thank you very much. Along the same lines, Andrea asked, you said a dark transformer can be beneficial to a company, but how can you trust them long term?
It's not long term. um, it can't be. Once you know that these people are deeply flawed, again, DC is a great example. This man, if he was still alive, he'd be in power in some sort. Okay. Look at oh gosh, I don't know why I'm drawing a blank with her name. Ugh, cheese and crackers. That's something. Um, I'm drawing a blank, but let me go back to one of my slides because this is driving me nuts. She was one of the dark leaders, believe it or not, that Winnie, why am I forgetting Winnie's name? Winnie Mandela, right?
Hmm. Hmm.
Okay, she was a
Oh
dark,
yeah.
honey, she was a dark transformational leader. She kept the
Hmm.
work going in ruthless ways while her husband was incarcerated. Okay.
Hmm.
So you know, she again, she did some many things that were so unethical and egregious. I mean, to the point of encouraging people to, you know, brutally kill others, okay, to get them out of the way, to end apartheid. And so, but with her though, she in that regard, we see the example of how she did a lot of unethical things to achieve something ethical. But look at the cost. It wasn't worth it. There was death, there was mayhem, there were lives involved. Um, and people remember that, right? And in many ways, she darkened Mandela's legacy. So you can't keep them long term. You just absolutely cannot. If you realize that you have a transformer that, but they're deeply flawed in their character, they're willing to break the law, they're willing to start a coup, you got to get them out. They're just not worth it. Let them go cause destruction someplace else.
Right. Dr. Ray Forbes asked the questions, what is the difference between a dark side transformer and a sociopathic personality?
Mm, that's a good question. From what I have seen so far, a sociopath operates primarily in isolation, if that makes sense. Um, they may have several colluders or susceptible followers to carry out their work, but they're not always as visible up front. These transformers can't be hidden. Their personalities don't allow it. Um, they really have all of those four elements that draw them to the forefront, whether they want it or not. So for me, from what I've read and researched, usually a sociopath is primarily in the backdrop.
Okay.
Jim Jones is a good one because,
Mm-hmm.
he was not in the backdrop. He was very much in the forefront, and he had these folks so mesmerized that they were somewhere else and got the word and killed themselves. So he's an example too, one may say, well, he was just a sociopath. But because he had those that he commissioned, and he had those colluders and followers, and the ripeness of the environment of that community of folks. But he was very much in the forefront. He had a personality.
Great. We have one more question from Dr. Namet Alpay. She asked, how do you communicate with the followers of the dark leaders to help them see the dark side?
Mm, that's a good one. That's a good one. How do you communicate with the followers? Well, it's kind of tricky because you're trying not to cast a negative shadow on the leader, right?
Mm-hmm.
But you can, first of all, your culture has to be ripe,
Mm-hmm.
has to be cultivated for either or. Because when you have followers who are cultivated in the right environment, they're not going to cross the line. They're going to recognize the behavior, and they too will be saying, well, we're going to get the job done, but I'm not going to go have a beer with this person. I'm not going to talk offline with this person.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to be careful about the emails and the language that I use, because I don't want to be seen as crossing the line in ethics. So I think you have to have ongoing professional development. Your environment has to be cultivated for the right leaders and followers. And if that soil is right, because see, many of these followers excel in corrupt systems when they're operating from the dark side. And we see that with the examples that we gave, even down to Enron. So you have to constantly keep watch and cultivate the environment for which your subordinates and followers exist. And even, it goes the same even in your personal life, keeping those boundaries. Like, what do you stand for when no one's looking? What are you doing when no cameras are around? You still have to have that same lifestyle personally, so that you too won't be given over to some of these habits.
Thank you so very much. We do welcome and thank Dr. Cecilia Martin for a wonderful, invigorating discussion. And as I shared, we will continue this discussion on May 25th, and on tomorrow, Wednesday, May 19th at 11:30 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, we will have our Women in Leadership panel here at the Franklin University Leadership Center. Our own Sherry Mercurio will moderate this session with four wonderful women: Dr. Kim Campbell, who's the Director of Enrollment Management at Mount Carmel College of Nursing; also Irenia Batinesco, the founder of the Mulberry Club; Alina Laguina, she's the Director of Education and Development; and our well-known Margie Pizzuti, who's the former President and CEO of Goodwill Columbus. And we're looking forward to another wonderful time. And please feel free to follow us at franklin.edu, leadership events, as well as all of the leadership centers and all of the centers at Franklin University. We're excited to have you at any of our sessions. Thank you and have a wonderful afternoon.
Thank you.